but you guys don't appear, so that's okay. So welcome everyone. Hello, Walt and Neelam, Marie. So everyone can hear me, right? All systems go. So I was thinking today, maybe if you like, we could just do a kind of, like, you could throw a few topics at me and I could weave together a Dharma talk. Or otherwise, I have kind of a backup plan of talking about impermanence and death, because that was a very cheerful subject some people recommended when I asked them on Facebook. Because I think sometimes having COVID around you, hearing about this big change, maybe makes you think about your own mortality, makes you feel a little uncertain, anxious, makes you feel a little afraid of the unknown. So what do you think? Would you like to hear about some different topics woven together? I could also add in death and impermanence into whatever you want to throw at me. It makes for an interesting Dharma talk if I feel inspired. What do you think? If you have something to say, you can just put up your hand and I'll unmute you. Otherwise, you could just put it in the chat screen. Do you want to hear a woven Dharma talk of our suggestions, or do you want to hear about death and impermanence? Be creative. But don't ask me to talk about emptiness all day. What do you think? Nobody's saying anything. You can wave your hand, I'll unmute you. Or I can see some people are typing. Yeah, Walt. Okay. What would you like to hear about, Walt?
Permanents are fine. They're right on top. I'm reading Thich Nhat Hanh's No Death, No Fear. So that's been very good. That combined with emptiness, the discussion I had with another teacher involved emptiness quite a bit. So I'm still meditating on that and
okay,
flow around in my mind. So yeah, I'd be interested in those three. Sure.
Yeah, I mean, I think emptiness is kind of it does follow on. It's kind of a bit of a interrelated subject, although emptiness is a very big subject. Okay, does anyone else have any other subjects they'd like to hear about? People are so shy when they come on here, although sometimes people can really get out of hand if you unmute them. Somebody's written here in chat, okay. Up for anything. I'd like to hear your thoughts about death and impermanence and anything surrounding the anxiety of COVID-19. Yeah. I think there has been a lot of anxiety, and you kind of go through, I think people were extremely anxious in the beginning, and then there was a kind of a phase where they went into they were kind of enjoying it like a holiday, if they were not financially stressed. And then, and some people, more introverted people, have done quite well. Like they've discovered, wow, I like having more time with my family. I like learning Spanish. I like reading Lord of the Rings cover to cover in a day. Whereas, more extroverted people who are used to just getting out there and meeting friends and thrive from that input are starting to go a little bat crazy. So you see all these people who normally really have it together and kind of look really together are suddenly kind of teary on Facebook and Instagram going, it's just so hard. I never thought it would be like this. And maybe, because it's a really huge shift away from normal life. But before I talk more about that, would anyone else like to add any other subjects in? Or are you all just happy to hear about this? No other? You're all introverts, obviously. Marie, this is a question. You suggested we said metta, living or dead. In Theravada, we don't send to the dead. My experience is I can't connect with people who have passed. They're not there. Well, that's also related to death and rebirth and sharing metta. So that's also an interesting question. Anything else before I begin to kind of start talking? No? Going once, going twice. Okay, so I've met Theravadan teachers who do, because even in Theravada, when someone dies, we do the sharing of merits, and it's not just about the person who has passed away. It's also about us making peace with those who have passed away, and having a sense of the circle of life. So many more earth-based spirituality communities, traditions, and communities that have not had the hoop of their circle, the culture, broken, have a great reverence for those who have passed away. I know there's Native American cultures where they actually have I think it's the Navajo, they have some of the ancestors, Anasazi, I don't know, they have the people who have passed away, and they mummify them and they put them in the cliffs above the village, and they say that they're living in the stars, and they're there, but they're still there. And even the Indonesian people have this tradition, some Indonesian tribe, where they actually dig up their ancestors once a year and offer them food and drinks. And another thing, there is another thing that some Mexicans, I think it is, South American people, they have the Day of the Dead, where they kind of remember those who have passed, and they go to the graveside of that person and drink some alcohol and have a picnic. That's my superficial white knowledge of this tradition. But there is, and the Chinese, there are some traditions of Japanese and Chinese spiritualities, native spiritualities that worship, ancestor worship. And even in Vietnam, it's very strong, that tradition of feeling that you are part of culture and a people, and that you're part, not just, that your priority is not just you, your priority is continuing the family line. Even in India, there's this obsession with continuing the family line, having a son or a daughter, but especially a son, because they burn incense at your grave and, kind of do the rites when you die. And it's just interesting in those cultures that the community is prime, not the individual. In India, if you ask someone who they are, they'll say, I'm his wife and I'm her mother. Like, even they, I don't know if it's a great thing, but like some women, they go around and you say, Vikram ki mummy, like that's the mother of Vikram. Like, she doesn't use her own name. You don't call your own name, and you would have a respectful title, like whatever your role is in that community. You're like grandpa or auntie or, venerable sannyasi religious person. People don't, it's not just their name, it's the role they play within that society. So their individual identity is superseded by their relationship to the community. And there is something, although that kind of culture can be oppressive in the sense that you don't, some of the Indian friends I have get married quite young, and they never leave home, or they just leave their mother's home to go to their marriage family's home. And, there's not a lot of, it's not like in America or Australia where you might have the kind of luxury of going, who am I? Why am I here? And what do I want to, do I want to travel? What do I want to do? There's a lot of, in those cultures, there is a lot more, you are from our community, and this is your destiny, and this is what you're supposed to do. So they don't have that kind of anxiety of like, what should I? Some of them do, like the more wealthy, more educated ones, or perhaps the ones that don't fit in some ways, like queer people or neurodivergent people, or people who have more money and more options. But certainly within those communities, people are given this sense of continuity from the past and the role that they have in the community. So that could be a freeing thing, in the sense that you don't have that burden of anxiety that a lot of Westerners have, like especially millennials. They have so many choices. They also have a lot of debt, but there's that sense of belonging. And I think when you have a sense of belonging, when you have a sense of where you fit into life, the system of life, there's less fear. I notice in India, like, I haven't seen people be so afraid of death, They even print photos of dead bodies in the newspaper. It's like not a big deal, it's just a body. People sit around someone who's died and gossip and, have a bit of a chat, and they just put grandma on the bed with in some glass jars, you know, and it's just very human, and it's not they don't hide it away. You know, the body sits out there for half a day, and then they take it to be burned, and people go and watch the body burn, although it's fairly covered with wood, so it's not quite as macabre as it sounds. And they'll tell stories about the person, you know. I think death was once part of life and not something to be feared. It's just seen as the circle of life. And there was a sense of timelessness in how you pass your genes on to others. You're continued in your children. You're continued, and maybe they have some kind of mythology around. See, when life was simpler, when the world was smaller, there was a certain comfort in believing in life after death, or believing that you continued in your children. And you know, when you have a more simplified worldview, I don't think there's quite as much fear and anxiety and existentialism about the nature of death and where we go. But yes, so many of us don't live in societies like that anymore. The new paradigm is the individual is prime, and Nietzsche said God is dead. And, you know, I think therefore I am. So it's like this extremely head-based, individualistic, disconnected society where we have a lot of freedom to give our life meaning. Our life has the meaning we give it. But in a world where everything around you is constantly changing, it's hard to kind of get a sense of where you belong, what the purpose of your life is, how other people see you, how you see yourself. I mean, you can kind of change yourself. You can redefine yourself. You can move to a different place, you know. And that can be freeing, but that could also be scary. I mean, even relationships, marriages don't last. In the West, we have a 50% divorce rate. And, you know, people spend all this money on weddings, you know, as if they're going to be married forever, because they're certainly paying off the debt forever. But then the marriage doesn't last, you know. Sometimes the debt lasts longer than the marriage. So some people are lucky. But it's always changing, and it gives us anxiety. We don't have a really strong self-identity. And Buddhists are kind of okay with that. Buddhism says, be okay with not being okay. Be okay with a constant change. But I have noticed, you know, I do feel more at peace in India, because in India, I have an identity as a religious person, you know, and people always come and see me, and I don't feel quite so lonely and isolated, and I feel part of and woven into the fabric of that society, and that feeling of belonging gives me a sense of continuity. The legacy of my charity work, you know, I feel like, well, if I died, I helped a lot of people, you know. So the amazing thing, I mean, of course, death is scary, and you can think that you've made peace with it, and then you have a near-death experience, and you realize maybe I haven't made peace with it. Like a few years ago, I almost got diagnosed with cervical cancer, although it turned out to be a false result, like a not real. But for a whole week, I thought, oh my God, I might have cervical cancer. And I was like looking up the results for survival and kind of freaking out, you know, and just thinking of all the things I hadn't done with my life. I mean, you would think that you reach a point, like I'm 43, you would think I would have reached a point where I've done a lot with my life and I'm content, but I don't feel like that. Even the older people I know feel like there's still more I want to do. I haven't had enough, you know. But what the thought of death and impermanence does for us is, I mean, the unexamined life is not worth living. The unexamined life, if we don't think about death, we're not fully living our life. You know, we're not making the most of each day. It's just easy to get into a kind of very 9-to-5 routine, you know, even taking our partner for granted, taking the beauty around us for granted, not seeing it, just thinking about, you know, saving enough super and the next job that has to be done, and being a rat chasing its own tail, the headless chicken, you know, thing. And I think pre-COVID, many of us were living extremely busy lives. And that's why, for some people, this chance to slow down has been a blessing, you know. It's like a mini retreat, you know. So we have to ask ourselves, what do I believe about life after death? If I was to die today, there are usually three contemplations in Buddhism we have, especially in Tibetan Buddhism. We say the time of death. Death is certain because there is nobody who ever lived that didn't die. Elvis Presley, Marilyn Monroe, John F. Kennedy, all those famous people, great kings and queens. No matter how exceptional they were, they're all dead, right? Everybody is going to die. One day our name will be in the obituaries. There are a lot of people walking around today with money in their bank account, with people waiting in their dating app profile, things to do. They've got things in their to-do list. They're completing a degree, and they think, I won't die. That won't happen to me. But they die. They end up in the obituaries. Death is certain. And the second point is, we don't know when. The time of death is uncertain. And it's sad. I mean, death is sad, in a way because life is precious, and if you live well, it's probably enjoyable. If you know how to live with wisdom, But at the same time, maybe it's the finite nature of our lives, that fleeting beauty, that little tinge of sadness that makes it all the more sweet, that we can appreciate and we can have compassion for people, that like a spark, like a flame, like a candle in the wind, like a bubble, such is the impermanence, like morning dew, such is the impermanence of life, So there's a certain poetry to it, there's a certain symmetry to it in the circle of life. And if we just stayed around forever, we wouldn't really give much of a chance to future generations, Hopefully we make the world better than it was when we came, and I don't think we're really doing that. Why? Because we have this kind of narcissism that our own desires, our own needs are more important than the planet and more important than the greater humanity and sentient beings and animals, which is kind of a tragedy, actually. Shows a lack of respect and a lack of wisdom in understanding that everything is connected. And this is something interesting Walt mentioned. Thich Nhat Hanh talks about how we have non-self elements. Everything we have comes from others. We appear to be solid individuals, separate. We have our own minds, our own karma. We are born, we exist, we die. But if you look more closely, it's like a rug. At first, the rug seems like a separate piece, But you look closely and then you see its threads, horizontal and vertical, tanna and banna, we say. And in between is woven the cotton or the silk or the wool, the colors of our lives, There is a pattern. We can remember who we were when we were 5, when we were 10, when we were 20, but we're not the same person. I'm not that little girl with pigtails, and yet I am. That's why we use the term mind stream in Buddhism. We don't say soul or self. We say mind stream because there is continuity in a mind stream. You can never put your foot in the same river twice, but there is a continuity of water that flows from the Himalayas down to the Ganga basin and out to the sea. So there is a continuity of this person called Aya Yeshe or Nick or Nilam. But at the same time, that person is constantly changing. And the beauty of change is that you can go from suffering to freedom. You can go from holding on to letting go. But it's knowing when to let go is the thing. And knowing the right way to let go. And letting go is not just apathy or ignoring suffering. Every suffering, every kind of oppression affects us, and we have to work with it. We have to work within the conditions of relative existence. So making the world a better place, ensuring the well-being of society is part of our path as a compassionate, ethical person. So emptiness doesn't mean nihilism. Emptiness doesn't mean apathy. Emptiness doesn't mean not giving a crap about those who suffer. Emptiness actually means fullness. Emptiness means everything is connected. Everything is sacred in the web of life. 6 degrees of separation. And, we know that we're made of elements. We know that we have the stuff of stars in us. We know that we're carbon-based life forms. We know that our non-self elements are the air, the earth, the water, the farmer who grows our food, the people who bring us the food, the government, our parents, our loved ones, our culture, the people who, our childhood experiences, the trauma, the intergenerational trauma of our lineage, our gender, or our imposed gender, our religion, the wisdom of the spiritual ancestors that we've chosen. So all of those things are woven into who we are. And our self is a composite of those non-self elements coming together in time and space, functioning in a relative way. But we're conditioned. You know, if you take away no earth, no more food, no more ayayeshe. No mother and father, no more ayayeshe. Maybe if I was born in Zimbabwe and my name was Zenani, I don't think I'd be a Buddhist nun. You know, I might be a village woman with a cute baby strapped on my back. Who knows? You know, I could be a completely different person. I might be a very different kind of feminist, you know. So emptiness is fullness. Emptiness is not nothingness. Emptiness just means that the relative self you have exists, but it is conditioned and it changes. And what emptiness shows us is we are connected to all of heaven and earth, and therefore happiness is not just a personal matter, it's a communal matter. Therefore the water is us, the sun is us, the earth is us, the farmer who grows our food is us. So, you know, taking care of our second self, taking care of the water, taking care of the air, taking care of the earth, doing no violence to others who are intimately interconnected with us, our neighbors, is part of our spiritual practice, you know, that happiness is about interconnectedness and that we need each other. But we also need to take care of our own mind and have self-care, self-compassion, and fill up our own cup before we can go and help others. You know, like if you haven't, we all have trauma, we all have neuroses, we all have financial struggles, educational struggles. You've got to get your basic security, your basic mind working well as much as you can, you know, and know your own capacity to benefit others, you know. You don't have to, you work according to your capacity, yeah? And don't think I'm broken, I'm traumatized, I can't help anyone. Leonard Cohen said, you know, there is a crack in everything, that is how the light gets in. Ring out the bells that still can ring, forget your perfect offering. And there is this Japanese art, I think it's called, I can't remember the name, but you know, the pot is broken and then they stick it together with gold and it's even more beautiful and strong, right? So people who have been broken, the best counselors I know, the best therapists I know, the best guidance counselors, the best teachers are the people who've gone through shit, compost. They're growing with the suffering of life, with the challenges of life, with the brokenness of life. Life is not easy, and we're all a little crazy. We're all suffering. We're all doing our best to be happy. We're all a bit neurotic. We're all a bit paranoid. Do you really love me? Am I good enough? You know, and we all struggle with the impositions of the idea of beauty and validity and success that others impose on us as well. So when you understand what somebody has gone through, hatred is no longer possible. You may condemn their actions. You may realize this person is not good for me. You know, I can't help them, but I wish them well. Or you may realize I have the same trauma as this person. I can help this person because I worked through this issue. But the beautiful thing is about impermanence, there is always a chance to grow. As long as there is life, there is hope. You never stop growing. You never stop learning. And you can develop compassion. You can develop brotherhood and sisterhood. And you can see, though you have wounds, you also have Buddha nature. You also have joy. You also have the capacity to love and forgive and let go and transform and heal. And that is how, when you can open your heart to your own pain and begin to feel your pain and let go of just feel your feelings, that's when the healing begins. When you acknowledge, you know, I'm a little bit broken, I've been harmed, but I also recognize that I have the capacity to transform this. Because the best It's the most composty compost that grows the roses, right? It's the dung, the juicy stuff, the messy stuff. That is the path. Path is not just about being perfect, being the best Buddhist nun with the neatest robes, or the most Buddhisty Buddhist, the most learned Buddhist, the best musician. It's those people who can dig deep into those painful, deep places in ourselves. They're the ones who give the best performances. They're the artists who can pull out a piece of work that is timeless. You know, they're the mother who can sit with the crying baby because she's calmed the crying baby in herself. You know, they're the partner who can just not allow their partner's neuroses to upset them, because they know, I'm a little crazy, I'm going to be patient with your craziness. One of us can be crazy at a time. And if there's too much craziness, too much like, I need this, then go to a therapist, you know, find some balance. But if you have this, if you dig into these juicy, scary places in yourself, your capacity for wisdom, your capacity for joy, holding space for others, empathy, resilience grows. See, trauma is something painful, something wounding that was not resolved, that's still triggered, that you go back into that space of being triggered. Whereas if you've gone through something painful and you've faced it and you felt those feelings, you know, it's a process. You know, healing trauma takes years and maybe the help of a therapist. But if you can go through the stuff, the curveballs that life throws you, and grow and feel those feelings and not run away, neither suppress nor act out, you become lighter. You become more wise, more resilient, and more compassionate. The most kind people I know, the most generous people, are not the ones who have had a perfect life. So I don't think we should feel ashamed that we're a little bit broken. Be like that pot with the gold in the middle. The gold is the insights, the hard-won insights of facing death, of facing fear, of facing our brokenness. Because human life is sad, you know. There is a certain kind of sadness. And my friend said to me, Buddhists are pessimists. Buddhists is just about suffering. And I really don't think that is the case. I just think if you're pretending life is only happy, you're only living a half-lived life. If you're only not having a full spectrum of emotion, you're probably not fully opening your heart to the realities of life. And only by saying, you know we're going to die, by facing that fear, then we begin to let go of our fear. By acknowledging our fear, it has no power over us anymore. You know? And we start to live well. We start to slow down. And we start to take care of every moment of life left to us. Did you taste your tea today? Do you know how lucky you are to have tea? Some woman carried that tea on her back down from the mountain. The water of the Himalayas is in that tea. The Chinese people who discovered tea are in that tea. The kind vegan company that made the almond milk, or the cow that gave the milk, is in that tea. The sugarcane farmers is in that tea. And just being in the present moment with your tea, you see all of that is a perfect moment. All of heaven and earth is in that tea. And your mind is in the present moment, because this is the only way to fully live life. We're also frantically FOMOing, fear of missing out, sticking as much as we can into our life. It's like a hoarder's house. You know, like, tomorrow I've got this, and today I've got that, and then I've got to do this, and then I've got to meet that person, and I just don't want to miss out. But in the end, we're just kind of exhausted, and we feel we're spread too thin. Whereas if you actually do few things, but do them well, you know, do the most important things first. If life is a jar, put the biggest and most important rocks in first, and then put all the little smaller pebbles, and then finally fill it up with sand. So if your life is a jar, you've got finite time, you've got finite resources, you can't do everything. Do the most important things first. You know, financial security, peace of mind, community, meaning, benevolence, generosity, leaving the world a better place than when you found it. Dealing with the demons of the heart, the prisoners of the heart, liberating the prisoners of the heart. And we can only do that by facing our pain, facing our fear. Once we face our fear, it's already liberated. It's not, it doesn't hound us anymore. And of course it's okay to feel whatever you feel, but just know that your feelings are not always objective, and no one else owes you to live by your feelings, because they're your feelings, not theirs. But hopefully if there's someone who cares about you, they need to respect your boundaries and your needs within a compromise, within a healthy compromise. So I've talked about how there is the circle of life, you know, even if you're an atheist, even if you're someone who doesn't really believe in future lives, you can think of the circle of life as, my body will go back to the elements. My body will be buried in the earth and nourish the trees, and I will become the flower in spring, the hummingbird drinking the nectar from the flower. The water in my body will go back into the waters of the earth and nourish the forest. The heat in my body will go back into the element of heat, and I will become the bonfire for some young people, the cooking fire of some village woman. The burning of my body will become gas, you know, and will go up and mix with some water particles, and tomorrow I will come down as rain, you know. And you know, you'll live on in the heart of those who loved you. But even if nobody remembers you, you know, it's about how you live well today, your life today. I don't think there is anything to fear from an end. There's just, and if you look in life, nothing is lost, only transformed. So you just continue on in a different form. And you think, oh, there's this me. We fear losing this me. But this me is a little bit of a burden. Carrying around this me all the time, obsessing me. You know, our greatest and most joyful moments are when we just drop it and we're just present with our friends, with our sensations, when we notice the greater nature and world around us, when this me is a little more low-key. So imagine if you could see that you're a part of everything, and this small me, this small self-grasping, this fear of dying, if you connect to something greater than yourself, it just expands beyond the boundaries of yourself. And what the states of mind that you thought were possible, because if you're really obsessive and narcissistic and you believe every thought that comes in your head, you will hold very tightly to your suffering, and you will hold very tightly to your own life and your own plans. But life is what happens to you while you're busy making other plans. So it's not about having this great agenda that we're always looking to the next mountain, you know, like when I get this, I'll be happy. When I get that, I'll be happy. But this great moment of happiness never arrives because we're never fully present to the miracle of life as it's taking place in the present moment. I mean, how many bloody certificates of achievement and university degrees and songs and jobs and lovers do we have hanging in our past closet or on our wall? And we've achieved all these things, we've done all these things, but do they make us happy? Is it not in the doing? Is it not in the journey rather than the destination that we live? So how do you, even in the midst of your plans, your endless scheming, that's why monks and nuns simplify their life, and it's more happy. The less plans you have, the more present you are, the more happy you will be, the more simple your life will be, and the more able, the more empty your heart, more present your heart is, the more you'll be able to take up with the plans and the needs that arise naturally as part of the flow of life. It's okay to have plans. It's okay to have passions and things you're interested in. We'd be a blob if we didn't. But it's also important to take care of each moment, you know, like practice eating. Happiness is not so hard, not so complicated. It's just about emptying out the mind, making some space, clearing away the dust, the obscurations. The goodness is already there. You're already full and whole and beautiful. You don't need to lose weight or be white or be heterosexual or have a lot of money. You can just come into the present moment. And you capture that part of yourself which is timeless, beyond gender, beyond race, beyond wealth. You know, you're just sitting there in the present moment with your eating your food, chewing. And it sounds kind of like, wow, I mean, how would just eating my food bring me into a moment of transcendent timelessness. But I can only say try it for yourself, a couple of steps. The Buddha said it is better to live one day with mindfulness than 1,000 years in distraction. Better is it to be one who has conquered one's own mind than to conquer 1,000 enemies in battle. The greatest victor is the person who has overcome their own delusion, the illusion of their separate self. Yeah. So that doesn't mean that you're one with everything. It means you're interbeing with everything. You still have to take care of this relative mind-body. And your feelings matter, your trauma matters, your financial basic, getting those things sorted out does matter. Because if you don't have those things, if you haven't got your basic needs met, you can't taste this timeless dimension, because you're always worried, someone going to come and beat me up, or am I going to get food tomorrow? But once you have those basic things, what more do you need? How many times do you need to renovate your house? How many times do you need a second or a third garage? How many more degrees do you need? And have you tasted your lunch? Have you drunk your tea? Do you know how to just live in the present moment and savor each day, each moment? So the way to live fully is not to endlessly plan and scheme or do everything. It's to do few things but do them well. And to come into the present moment, to connect with that spacious mind of mindfulness in the present moment. Take a few deep breaths. To set your clock to chime a few times every day and come back to your breath. Ah, yes, I remember. Present moment, wonderful moment. And even if in that moment you feel jealous, anxious, down on yourself, not good enough, too fat, too old, too brown, too white, too forgetful, it's good enough. This is adventitious obscurations me. This is me, the Buddha with amnesia. Yeah, so I hope you kind of get what I'm saying. I've probably spoken quite a bit. I've spoken about how there is no, Abrahamical religions view time as a circle, right? Alpha and Omega, beginning and end. Buddhist and Eastern religions view, like Hinduism, Jainism, Buddhism, more Confucianism, they view life as a circle, no beginning, no end. Because if you go back in the infinite web of life, the infinite causes and conditions and effects, you keep splitting and splitting and splitting, and you can't find anything in the end. You just see everything as part of everything. Nothing is lost, only transformed. So you're part of the circle. And when you just relax and come back to the present and empty out the mind, that circle of peace, that circle of interbeing is there, and that is wholeness. And there is no fear of extinguishment there, because what is born can never be lost. What has never been born can never be lost, right? What was your face before you were born? That means you're empty to begin with. You never fully existed inherently separate from your own side anyway. So there is nothing to be lost. There is only the appearance of these causes and conditions that we call ayayeshe. And relatively it exists. But ultimately, it is part of everything, and you go back into everything. And having that sense of illusory nature of myself, there is this kind of freedom that comes, that we're not so attached, Things still matter, but we also if someone had a car accident in a dream, it wouldn't be so bad, right? You wouldn't be so upset. You'd be like, wow, that sucks, but it's okay, I'm still alive. So likewise, all these things we think are so important in our 20s are not important in our 30s. The person we love today may be the stranger of tomorrow. All these things we're so invested in, we're so temporary. So have a sense of being a child of illusion. Know that this too shall pass, and invest in the timeless, luminous abiding. That's why we touch base with the infinite every day in meditation. And that's why we cultivate that mental spaciousness, that timeless awareness. But in the end of the day, these are just concepts, You have to meditate, you have to taste it for yourself. You have to taste the deathless for yourself. And it's a wonderful thing to not grasp all the time, to not be holding on to a small separate self when you are just part of a bigger picture. So I think I spoke about impermanence and death, and I spoke about emptiness, I spoke about the circle of life, I spoke about identity, I spoke about how social justice and happiness is not just a personal matter. So connecting in with emptiness and fullness, we know that we have a duty to care for our second self, because if in a society where there are people who are extremely insecure, really suffering, that creates instability and suffering for everybody. And sending service to the dead. So there's a really beautiful gospel song by Sweet Honey and the Rock, which is an African-American group of women, and it said, wow, can I remember it? We are our grandmother's prayers, and we are our grandfather's dreaming. We are the breath of the ancestors. We are the spirit of love. For each child that's born, a morning star rises and sings to the universe who we are. So it's like you're part of everything. You are not separate. And because you're part of everything, there is no death and there is no birth. Because you already are. You're already in the elements. You are already part of that lineage. You're a continuation of your parents. You're a continuation of a culture that has gone on a millennia. You are part of the good things and the bad things of that culture. You carry the burden of that privilege, of that genocide, but you also carry the potential for redemption, for love, for transformation, for justice. You may be the cause of so much suffering, but you also are the answer. Yeah, and that is why we chant for the dead, because the dead are part of us. The ghosts of our white history are with us now. And the sins of the father are inherited to the child. What we are doing to the planet, our selfish and gross consumption that is destroying the planet, our children will inherit. We really need to put the brakes on now before there is complete destruction, and apologize to our children, and let them lead the way, because we clearly have failed in that sense, in the environmental sense. We don't just chant for the dead, we chant for ourselves. We chant for the ghost in ourselves. And we chant to heal the relationship we have, the unresolved wounds we have with those who have loved us but not loved us perfectly, who we have not loved perfectly. Okay, it's enough. A lot of talking. Does anyone have any questions? If you have a question, you can just type it in the... sorry, I'm moving the camera. You can type it in the box, the chat box, or you can just put up your hand. Have I missed something? I think I pretty much spoke about everything you ask. You're all just introverts, quiet introverts who don't want to say anything. No? Yes?
So, America just passed 100,000 deaths from the virus. And all I'm hearing from people is, we need to open up. We need to get the economy going. We need to go. And this is people that I know, that I work with and stuff. So, I mean, I guess there's a balance there, right? Like, if you look in India where they shut everything down. And
yeah, and there's also a lot of crazy conspiracy theories, like from the right and the left, and they're intersecting. These crazy people, like people who are alt-right and people who are yoga teachers, are now both saying plandemic, hashtag end the lockdown, and it's like, have you looked at the obituaries? Like, and so I didn't really address that COVID anxiety, but I think I've talked about interconnectedness and getting into the big picture as an answer to the pain of separation and the pain of isolation. But yeah, it's not right. People are still dying, and it's clearly not gone away. It's just receded in some places. I mean, it's fairly clear that the agenda of getting people out and about is not to do with their well-being. It's to do with the interests of billionaires, basically the profit of billionaires, which is pretty inhumane. Whereas in countries like Australia, I think they've treated it very well because they gave everybody a livable wage, and they've said, well, even if we incur debt, we don't want everybody to die, because everybody's life is valuable. And countries that have done that, people are doing better, basically. People are not as freaked out. Whereas I think part of, it's easy to kind of laugh at those crazy people who think that there is no pandemic. Those people open carrying, going, I need a haircut. It's like the epitome of entitlement, whether they're left or right wing, like, oh, let's sacrifice grandma for the economy, It's kind of heartless. But there is another, and I think America has this thing of individuality taken too far. And white privilege, this idea that, I saw a woman who was basically naked and she had operating masks on her face and her private parts. And she was like, this is about my liberty. No one can tell me what to do with my body. And it's about freedom. And this is the same as civil rights and feminism and ending slavery. And it's like, no, it ain't. Girlfriend, it ain't. You better check yourself.
It's very embarrassing.
I know.
Yeah.
And I watched this Facebook thing and all these black people were just going like crazy white people, no.
Yeah.
And it's like a form of narcissism, that they think that not being able to get a haircut is the same as, being enslaved for 100 years. Or, being forced to bear children simply because you have a womb, or, being silenced and beaten by your husband, or being horribly poor. So obviously it's clearly misguided, and it shows a kind of narcissism and self-absorption, But I think also it comes from, we have to look from the other side. I think it comes from people having no inner life. I think they're just really feeling suffocated, like they can't bear it. They have no inner peace, no inner life. And I think it's also about some people, not more, blue collar folks in the country there are a lot of people actually who didn't get that $1,200 stimulus. And there are literally people who are starving, So those so-called rednecks, it's not just about them being white supremacist trash, It's about them starving, and the government ignoring them. And the way that the capitalist system makes people desperate to force them into doing things that prop up the system and prop up the privilege and profits of sometimes very unethical people, not always, but quite often. So that fear and exploitation feeds into a system of profit that puts profit before people. I'm getting very left-wing now. But, it's hard. I mean, I can't believe the amount of good people I know in my feed who are just kind of saying that it's fake, and how misguided and dangerous their propaganda is. It's like they'll believe something about aliens on YouTube, but they won't believe BBC News. And I think that's actually an intentional thing from some billionaires who have bought news channels like Foxtel and Murdoch Press, who want to put forward their agenda and have created a lack of faith in government institutions and the news. That's how they destabilize democracy. But, can we change the mind of others? What we can do is try to be a voice of reason and live with integrity and help those around us we know who are struggling to find food and to find comfort. I think some of those people, although they're behaving in appalling ways, they just miss their friends and feel extremely anxious, and they just want to return to normal. It's like the monkey who has been so used to a certain routine goes crazy when given someone who's lived in a cage their whole life. If you open the door, they'll freak out and they just lose their track of reality because they're just so used to that system of what they're used to. Whereas the people who are maybe have a little more inner insight, or people who've gone through, people with immuno conditions and who've lived with disability and who've seen the depression, they have a bit more inner resilience to know, okay, this will pass. This is just part of, human beings get sick, viruses happen. If you live, you're also going to die, you're also going to get old. They have more resilience and more insight and more of a long-term view. And actually, I mean, keeping people inside is not, it's an act of compassion to keep them safe so they don't die. It's not about their rights being infringed. It's about them being protected and us staying home to protect each other. Like staying home in a place like America where there is so much of COVID around is an act of compassion and an act of solidarity. Whereas in Australia, there's not a lot. So it's probably okay. Like New Zealand, they only had like 10 deaths. So it's not such a big deal for them to be opening their economy again. But for somewhere like America, it's really unconscionable. Does anyone have any other questions before we finish? I know you want to raise your hand. Yeah, go ahead. Can you unmute yourself, or should I unmute you? I'll unmute you. Hang on. You've done it.
Oh, I was just thinking that what you said at the very beginning about faith, or what you said about facing how we feel, and that's such an important part, I think, of our practice. Facing fear of death, facing anxiety, facing everything we feel, and I think that's so revolutionary in a way when it's I feel like denial of our basic feelings and our basic what we're all going through, at least in the United States where I am. People are made fun of for being scared basically and wearing masks and so on, when I think that the people who are doing the making fun of are probably the most afraid. This denialism that drives conspiracy theories like pandemic and so forth, I think is exactly because we are so afraid of our own feelings and each other and death. You mentioned the societies where death is part of life. That would be, to have a ceremony where a corpse is viewed with such equanimity, would be so radical for us. What I mean, I think it's thank you for reminding me, it's such a revolutionary thing just to be human with ourselves and with others too. I think it can really change the world,
I think also to humanize those, like imagine if we did get together and have like a grieving of, well, I've seen some people make some really nice posts like, what have you appreciated since you went into lockdown? What do you not want to go back to when you come out of lockdown? What do you miss and grieve for? And people just sharing together what they grieve for and miss, and humanizing that rather than taking up arms against suffering. And that's the difference, I think, between Buddhism and a lot of other religions. It's like a sense of you don't act out, you're not violent. You examine inside first. What is the truth of that? Where is this fear coming from? These people are externalizing their fear and making it an issue of personal rights. Like I insist my right to do this is more important than the community's well-being. Whereas if they face their own fear, they can process that internally and they don't need to act out their aggression on others with a lack of foresight, a lack of compassion. Yeah. So, and I think that's why I said it's a lack of internal resilience, to be able to process your feelings and emotions, and just this idea that society owes you to just give you whatever you want, like a spoiled child. An older child, a mature child learns patience for reward, like clean your room and you'll get pocket money. But some of these people are behaving like an infantile, demanding little tyrant, like I'm not going to wait for my, I want it now. I'm going to roll around on the floor, or I'm going to open carry and, go outside and infect other people because I'm more important. And it's so immature and short-sighted. And then they wonder, then they blame even more, like I got COVID because, the Chinese did this and it's their fault. We always want to blame someone. rather than, just understanding that, well, one, the way we keep animals all over the world for consumption is unhygienic and cruel. And if we're going to eat animals, at least we should let them be free range and not give them so many chemicals and not let them be living in filth and eat less meat or not at all. So that's part of it, And also it happens everywhere, like why are we, if the disease, as it often did, come from Europe, we don't call it the European virus, but only if it's from some place where people are different to us, then it's the Chinese flu or the Chinese virus. So it's just part of human history to have sickness, there've been epidemics all through history, and blaming someone for that, for humans getting sick, is childish. No medical care either. Yeah, it's shocking what's going on in America with healthcare, and shocking. There's so many extremes in America. I find the left and the right are becoming very extreme, but it's just so interesting that they're both coming down to this other side of believing complete baloney. Like, what's going to happen? I don't know. It's the inmates have taken over the asylum. Yeah. But you can only do what you can do. You can get together with other sane people and, try to keep your sanity and do good things, Like Mother Teresa said, you can't do big things, but you can do small things with great love. The world has always been a messy place. But, the world has always had good people as well. Does anyone else have, we're maybe not so introverted. Zoom is just a strange medium. Tell me about it. It's a bit like my neurodivergent friends talk about being in a room with people but still feeling alone and feeling like you can't always read what they're feeling, and you're there but you don't feel completely connected. You're still in your own world. So I think it's a bit like that, like we're together but we're still a little bit alone. We're still feeling a little disconnected, and that can produce anxiety. But you're not alone in your anxiety. And that's the beautiful thing. Like, that's why it's so important. People resent minorities getting together and sharing culture. Or, people say, why do trans Buddhists need a trans group? Why do queer Buddhists need a queer Buddhist group? Or why do people with a disability need to get together and chat to other people with disabilities? It's because nobody knows your pigeonhole like someone who's lived in it, and you feel a sense of solidarity and inspiration to share your particular kind of experience, and it gives you strength to endure because you're not alone. A lot of us, even myself, have felt cabin fever, stuck in isolation. Like I was supposed to buy a monastery, and then the border closed, and now I can't do that. I just have to wait. People keep saying, when are you going back to India? When are you going to start a monastery? I don't know, because it's just COVID. COVID has brought me back into the present moment. But in a way, it's a relief, because I don't have the burden of scheming, like, how am I going to get enough money and how are we going to promote it? And it's great. I can just be in the present moment, But there are people who are really struggling and really don't have an income. Like, for example, in India, where really they're just starving, and actually locking them up is a form of cruelty. But it's such a double-edged sword, because in a place like India, it's so crowded. But on the other hand, if they're locked up indefinitely, people are going to start starving, or there's going to be some kind of revolt. So they have to balance that, In a place like America, it's unnecessary. That suffering is unnecessary, because really there is enough for people to have a basic living wage. But it's interesting, in lockdown, you also learn you don't need as much as you thought you did, right? Like, I hardly use my car now. I don't buy anything. I don't spend any money. I'm just living at home, And I appreciate a chat, like you appreciate the simple things more. I appreciate a chat with a friend, or hugging my mother. My mother and I have never got on better in this mini apocalypse, because we're just appreciating. Normally we're just too frantic. We're going here, we're going there. We want different things. We're completely different people. We're arguing about the best way to organize the kitchen. But, now it's like, you're the only other human being on the world. I love you. So I can appreciate the good things and ignore the bad things, Yeah, so an appreciation of silence. The talk was quite beautiful. Thank you for singing. when I feel phased, when I go on Facebook these days, I feel faced with the emptiness of ideas. The crazy is way out of control. As you said, it's on all sides. There's a facile argument to contradict every fact. Yes, it's disturbing, actually. And it's like you're arguing with people and it's like they think that their opinion is fact. They've just lost the plot. How can you argue with people like that, you know? And people say, I'm entitled to my opinion, but your opinion is getting people killed. So no, you're not entitled to stupidity with no empirical evidence. I could just make some crazy video on YouTube and maybe people will believe it. You know, the earth is flat, let's make a video. So funny. Like my mother, when she sees it on the news, she believes it. When she sees a show about it, like if I talk about environmental justice, she's like, go away. But if she sees it on TV, she's like, the ice caps are melting. We really need to do something about that. So, yes. Somebody said, immigrant workers have it quite tough. Yes, that's true. And we know, Neelam knows, she's in India. People there, poor people are having a really tough time there as well. Immigrant workers had to walk hundreds of kilometers home because their heartless landlords kept charging them rent. And some people died on the way. The police beat someone to death for going to buy milk. So that's the kind of heavy stuff that's going on. And yet there's also, you know, these kind of times also bring out an amazing kind of kindness in people and generosity as well. Does anyone else have anything to say before we finish? I think we've had quite a nice chat today. I've enjoyed being alone together with you. You all seem like very reasonable, kind people. I'm very glad no one's spouting craziness. I'm glad you all agree with me, because I'm right. Okay, so you know it. You know I'm right. So thank you for your questions and for your presence, and I wish you joy. And it's a pleasure, and I'll be back next week. Same time, same color channel, always in color. And I wish you all joy and peace. And if you ever have any problems, you can message me. You can chat with me by messenger. I may not always get back to you immediately, but I'm available. And if you can donate for this class, I welcome it, because I've, at some point, when who knows when, I'll start a monastery. And if you could just offer $10 or more or less, if you don't have money, that's okay too. But it makes it available for others. And if you have any suggestions for next week's Dharma class, feel free to message me. This teaching will be on YouTube, and the donation will be on my Facebook page under the teaching link for this class. So thank you all so much, and I'll see you next week if you can. Have a great time. Be safe. All the best. You're not going crazy alone. We're all going crazy together. We can all go sane together too. May you all be happy and well. Take care.